Hello and welcome to Drawing Down the Stars. I'm your host, Snappy, and today we're joined with my good friend, Nick Chthonious. Nick is a practicing modern Greek pagan, and today we're just going to learn about his story, and we're going to do a deep dive into pagan Greek kind of practices in the modern age. So, hey, Nick, how are you today?
I'm doing good, man. How about you?
Wonderful. So glad to have you here with me. So, I want to begin with just kind of hearing your story. So, what are your roots? Where do you come from? What's your background?
Uh, I'm from a little small town in Indiana called VB, Indiana. It's actually called Switzerland County, and the symbol of it, which is really cool, I thought, is the grapevine. You know, the biggest thing there is the Swiss Wine Festival, and that's where I'm from. I've lived there most of my life. Um, my background, I've Well, my background, I was a trouble child most of my life. You know what I mean? I was always in and out of trouble and stuff like that. And until here recently, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in jail and stuff for drug addiction and whatnot, but I've overcame that. And and working wise, I've always worked in factories or construction or something like that. But
So, like in your early life, did you have any experiences with kind of like religion or spirituality? Were your folks in any of that, or do you like what's your take on that stuff?
uh, so I grew up, and my family wasn't really religious, but they always pushed the Bible on me. And as a young kid, it used to Christianity is what they pushed, but I never really believed in it because it scared the hell out of me. And as I got older, I started looking into it. I always thought there was in Christianity, even though I never accepted it, there was always two gods in the book. You know what I mean? You couldn't pass that up. There was always two gods, and nobody agreed with that. But as I got older, and I started to learn about the Greek gods and goddesses as a teenager, it always fascinated me, right? But everybody around me always kept telling me, "Oh, you know, they're false gods. You know what I mean? It's mythology for a reason." But as I started, you know what I mean, once I like started like really looking into it, and then I went to jail and I started reading the books in there. You know, the first one that I ever seen. I mean,
So,
I
like,
read some of the,
so you
what is it?
discovered like the Greek, you discovered the Greek mythology and stuff in jail. Like, what's the story there?
So like I read a couple books. Like this is gonna sound a little funny. The Percy Jackson books got me started into it. Like I started reading those,
That's cool.
and then I came across the Iliad, and then I dived deep into the Iliad, and it really fascinated me because I learned from like how it was kind of portrayed in the Rick Riordan Percy Jackson to the Iliad, and then it really opened up my horizon on how like deep it really was. And then from that, I seen the Odyssey, and then I started reading that, and then once I read the Odyssey, I fully committed to him. I actually believed it. I said, I told myself, who's to say what gods and goddesses ain't real? And then once I started praying to him, things started happening. Like my mind started getting clear. And then this one time, I was in a cell, and I was praying to Athena. This is the first experience I've ever had with the gods and goddesses, like wholeheartedly. I
So
prayed to Athena
why did you decide to pray to Athena? Just out of
because
curiosity.
I knew very little of what I believed in, and what I believed in was only on the two books of Homer and a little bit of fiction of Percy Jackson. And it made me, and like when I tell people, they laugh at me like, "Oh, it's Percy Jackson, blah blah blah," and then tell them a little bit about Homer. But I prayed to Athena for straight knowledge. I asked her to know more about the gods and goddesses, and when that happened, the trustee at the time slid underneath of my door a Morford and Langford College mythology, the classical mythology book, and it was in Medea out of all things. And like here recently, that just came to me like how important that book was. It was
Wow.
the Seneca and the Euripides or Euripides version of Medea. But in that book, as I read that book and I studied it, like I sat in my room and I studied and I had a whole bunch of notes. And in that book, I learned that it wasn't just simple like, oh, the 12 gods and goddesses and they rule from Olympus and all this. I found out how delicate and their roles and how intricate they are. And then something I found out about it that really struck me like was reincarnation, how powerful the soul is. And when I learned about reincarnation and all this, the moments that I had with Athena from reading that book is that I felt an overwhelming feeling. And I'm sitting in jail in my cell, and I have a bunkie too. It made me cry 3 times while I was reading that book because I never felt that I was so connected to something in my entire life.
Wow,
And then
that's
as I read that, I mean, it taught me about like the philosophers, Plato, and all of them, and then it taught me also about the Orphic account, which really blew my mind because it mentioned something that I've never seen before. And it's the Orphic theogony, and it had beyond chaos, which was the original creator, beyond the regular Greek. It separated the Orphic and the Greek in this book. And from the regular just Hellenism, not the Orphic account, it just has chaos as the originator. But when it introduced the Orphic account, it had Phanes before chaos. But it had something in there that I have not seen ever in my life since that book, and it was called Synthoi. And it had that before Phanes. I've never seen it anywhere else. Have you ever heard of that?
yeah. Like I think we were talking about, right? Like this is that thing. It gets called different things. This is the ion. This is
Oh,
Kronos as time, right? So that's that force that exists outside of this, right? It's the initiator, because you always have to ask, right? What cracks the egg, right? What heats up the waters to give birth to the egg, and that is Kronos. That's that force of desire, right?
it's
That
amazing.
separator, the great divider.
I love how you put that. It's the Aeon. It is Kronos, right? And we was talking about that before, and I wanted to ask you. I didn't think I got a question. I didn't get an answer. When it says Kronos in that Orphic fragment that I posted, it's spelled Chronos. I'm pretty sure, and then the regular one is like Kronos. Is there a difference? Do you think?
Okay, so this is something that's really interesting and a big thing of scholarly debate. And actually, one of the first questions I ever asked Ammon, because I noticed this, and lots of people have talked about this, and they say that they're actually two different deities entirely, right? A lot of scholars. But what I found was that in Saturnalia, they're regarded as one deity. And when I asked Ammon, they're seen as one deity, because what do they fundamentally represent, right? They're that dividing, separating force, and it's like they're variations of the same image, like it gets confusing for a lot of people who don't dig into this, but it's the same way how like Hades and Kronos are connected, right? Even though they're different images, they're also the same, right? It's like it's all
Well,
telling these different stories, right? Different variations on the same idea, But yeah, so I think they are fundamentally the same because yeah, Macrobius says so, and he was there.
it's amazing. I have the first Saturnalia book. I need to read that one. But yeah, so what I noticed the difference between the two was Kronos was time, and the father of the Titans and the father of the Olympians. And then with the Kronos, the only thing that I've seen it with that Orphic fragment that I was talking about is that it says unaging time. So I can see how
Yeah,
they're both the same deity.
so I can explain this, I think, through the Indian, because I see so much connection, even though they're different traditions, right? Like I believe that there's a lot of overlap. So take this for how you will. This is what I personally think, right? So uh, in the Vedic tradition, right, you have this idea of the force of Shakti, right? And Shakti is seen as desire, and it's active. It's like the active force. So when you see that image, right, of the snake wrapped around the egg, right? The egg is supposed to be representative of limitless time, unaging time, right? Time that's unbound. So that is like in the Indian tradition, or at least within the Shaivite tradition, Shiva. And then the snake, that's the active force, the dividing force. That's desire, right? So that is Shakti, right? That's the feminine aspect, right, of Shiva, right? Because Shiva is actually like a bi-gendered figure, right? And it's the same thing with Faunus, right? It's the same thing you see in the Greek tradition. So you have Kronos in his state where he exists outside of time, right? Where he's able to control time itself, right? Like, and that is Kronos, that's limitless time. And then you have the force of separation that's active. That's your, you know, your Kronos, right? As the Titan that we see, right? The one who separates and divides the waters, right?
That's amazing. But when you said that, it made me think, because how you said that you have him outside of time, right? And then you have him as like the father of time. But also, what I've seen in almost all of the accounts is that when Zeus, you know, what I mean, castrates him and he casts him out, he's also a chthonic version too, because he's in Tartarus, so he's in a physical place as well. So
Right.
there would be the three aspects.
Exactly, right? And remember, right? All of the gods have three aspects and they appear in a masculine, feminine, and bigendered form, right? And they all, the other thing, like Kronos is interesting because he, right? Like you got to remember, Kronos is representative of the force that creates the universe and exists outside of the universe and inside of the universe. Inside of the universe, that active force that exists within our universe, right? That is Kronos the tyrant. That's the force that divides and separates the universe as we understand it, right? I mean, in a sense, limitless Kronos does the same thing because he has to divide himself, right? In order to give, like, you see a similar idea, I think. Again, this is just comparison in my own understanding, but like you see a similar thing in Hasidim, right? Where they talk about how God has to make space for itself in order for the universe to exist, right? So there's this idea that that's that separation again, that dividing force, right? So this is Kronos always, you know, and everything is cyclical, right? So you have that, even there's that cycle that the final, remember I was talking to you about this, there's this idea of the final cycle, right? The final tyrant that has to be overcome. And that's Kronos as unaging time, right? That's how you break the cycle of death and rebirth and finally exit, you know?
So do you think that it's possible to do that in the body? Because I remember how I see that when you
No,
said that
no,
to me, I was thinking only you can do that through death,
no, of
and
course,
once you're
you have
still
to die,
alive.
right? But the purpose of life is to create the image, right? So this is another thing, like a lot of people have trouble grasping is this concept of living images, right? It's not the soul that survives after death in the Greek concept, at least the way I understand it. It's the image, right? And it's this image that can take on and become godlike, right? And it's the image that can eventually transcend time and space, right? It can join Kronos, right? You know, and that's kind of like what the whole purpose of the active Kronos is, right? Which this is also, you see, right? The active Kronos is the snake, right? It's the Shakti, it's the divine feminine, right? This is our Aphrodite figure, right? Our feminine figure with the penis, you know.
Yeah.
So, and that's the force that kind of shows you about how to return, right? And Dionysus is an aspect of that. That's the part that incarnates in the world to show you how to go back, right? It's a reflection of Faunus, right? It's Faunus ripped apart. At least this is how I see this. But yeah.
So how I understand the life and death conception of the Greek ways from what I've read, and I've been getting into it a little bit more with the philosopher side, especially with that J.R.S. Mead Orpheus book I was talking about. So when you die, I'm coming to find out that man is held to a standard, right? And especially with the philosophers, that the soul is trapped in the body, right? But as you live life, you're supposed to be mindful. You're supposed to indulge in the mind and less in the body. But the more that you indulge in the mind, the more that the body can absorb the soul. So when you die and you go down into Hades, you still have to repay everything that you've done, right? But Hades is not this dark malevolent force, right? He is the regenerator. And Zeus in the super cosmic triad that I was reading about, Zeus is the creator, Neptune is the preserver, and Hades is the regenerator. So how I portray it is when you go down and you have to pay for what you've done, but the sin in the Greek ways is totally different from Christian, right? The Greeks obviously enjoyed themselves. They loved to party. I mean, look at Dionysus, you know what I mean? He obviously promoted having joy of the body, but they wanted you to combine it. You couldn't have too much pleasure of the body, or else you wouldn't be mindful, right? You would be, you know what I mean, not paying attention to anything. You wouldn't care about philosophy. You would be, you know what I mean, basically disrespectful. How, you know what I mean, a lot of people nowadays, especially in younger generations, they don't care about anything except what's in front of them. You know what I mean? But when you go down there, Hades judges you, and the three judges, you know what I mean? And then you have to go through the fields of punishment to purge your soul of all of these impurities. So basically, you have to run your soul through the soul forge, and then you get reincarnated. And then, according to some cases, how Plato was saying in his Timaeus was that sometimes if you don't get it right as a man, when you become reincarnated, you're a woman. You come back as a woman. And then if you don't get it right, then you come back as an animal. And then in other cases, it comes about how you've lived your life is how you're going to come back. If you didn't ascend and reach that true celestial form. That was one of the most beautiful things I read in that Morford and Langford College book, is that our goal as a Hellenistic polytheist is to reach our true celestial form in a life, in a physical life.
Right. Okay. I want to just riff on this because, you know, I think, yeah, for the most part, I see where you're coming from and where you're getting at. And what I like to draw out of those images is like the philosophy behind it, right? So when you're looking at, right, when we're looking at the chthonic, specifically the chthonic aspect here, it's an agricultural understanding, right? So Saturn is this force that divides us, right, and causes this separation. But the purpose of that is for knowledge, right? You can only know through the separation. Fundamentally, right, Kronos is seeking knowledge, and that's the whole point of creation, right? It's this unfolding of ever greater knowledge. So life is a trial. Each succession of life that you have, you're meant to overcome and you're meant to learn things so that you can evolve over time into the next life, right? So Kronos is always described as what? As like a fruit grower. You know, there's all of this stuff about us as a fruit. He eats of the fruit, right? But each cycle, the fruit gets riper. He doesn't destroy the plant, you know? So this is that understanding. There's this ever ripening, right? So each life, the way I see it, there's a chance potentially for escape, right? But there's always this alchemicalization that's happening where we're constantly evolving, right? And what you see with the judges is like, it's like karma, and not in like the traditional Indian sense, but in that sense of like, you know, you have to pay your debts. If you hurt people, you have to pay that back. That's like, it's a very basic understanding of sin. It's not as complicated as the Christian one, right? You are responsible for your actions, and if your actions cause harm, then you have to pay that back. And it's very clear, at least in my understanding, that they had that, you know. And it's sometimes that karma will play out in how you incarnate. But I think like Plato, you know, he plays a lot of BS into it. You know, I think fundamentally what we're understanding is like each soul or each image, each person is meant to go through all of these experiences to be forged. You know, you have to be a man at one point, you have to be a woman at one point, you have to be an animal at one point. It's like it's mandatory, right? For some, well, some can escape otherwise. Some have to go through the cycle to the end, you know? Some have to wait to that final moment when everyone realizes. There's always that one person goes kicking and screaming, right? And then the cycle repeats. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
It's beautiful how you put that. Yeah. And as they said it, like I like how you said when we go back into Kronos, right? Into that original monad, you know what I mean? Before the egg, you know what I mean? We're basically in the egg before it hatches, right? So
Yeah.
what I was reading in this J.R.S. Mead book is that when we truly ascend, our bodies do become godlike. We're filled with a luminescent light, right? We all have this one little bitty fractured piece of light in us, a fractured light, you know what I mean? A ray from a sun. Even in Plato, it says every man and woman has a star. We all come from a star, right? And we have that one fractured light in us. And as we grow mindfully and we build on that light and that light becomes stronger, that's how we ascend. That's how we become illumined and we ascend, from what I believe in. But when we ascend, it also said, from what I've read and some of other Plato, is that we well, Proclus commenting on Plato, I should say, is that we go out of our bodies, right? And we are ethereal, like we're beyond it, and we're in the stars. So like
Yeah,
we're in the air. We're a part of the air in a way, you know.
because we become an image, right? And an image is set free. Like it's like this, you become an idea. You take on. It's like you got to look at, like Plato talks about it. You become a form, right? That's what the gods are, So you are beyond time and space, right? Like it's like you are trapped within a body, but the body gives you definition. It allows you to know. It allows you to construct the self. So then you can set the self free, right? It's like this paradox, right? I think a big problem of is that it's both dualistic, but at the same time monistic. And the trick is realizing the monism, you know. But and that's why, like Dionysus, the path is always absurd, right? You have to embrace the absurdity. You have to go into a place where knowledge ceases to be, because and that's kind of the what's so ridiculous about all of it, right? You have to die and you have to return to a point where knowledge can't exist to achieve total knowledge. So it goes against everything we fundamentally feel, right? Everything in it. Like, this is why the mysteries are so important, because you have to have that transformative experience before you can even understand, before you can even approach these kinds of things,
Well, yeah. So like when we die, we from what we forget, but it's still embedded in us because it's in that fractal light. Like that light is still consistent. It just gets wiped clean, purified. And when it does that, we go through that river of Lethe. We drink of the river of forgetfulness, and it erases our past lives. But I was also reading, and from how my own conception of it, this might be my own little twist, but a part of that ascending, and I know from a little bit that I know of the Hindu, that they find out the yogis and stuff, they find out their past lives, right? Like they eventually get to a point to where they know what they did in their past lives. Is that true?
Yeah, fundamentally. There's a great revealing. Well, it talks about, like, true enlightened masters can see through all time, right?
Oh wow.
You can you have like, this is where you get the idea of, like, things like the Akashic records, right? There's this idea that the true gurus can see through time and space, and they can move through time, and they can read and access all knowledge, but also what you see in a lot of these Indian traditions is like this, almost like a genetic memory, but it's a memory that's passed down through lineage, through spiritual lineage, right? So like, I achieve enlightenment, okay? I become a guru. Then I'm able to pass on this essential essence to my student, when I die. And like, a part of me lives on within the student, and the student is able to become that image and like carry on that tradition. Like, when you look at, like, the next guru is seen as the previous guru, like, it's
Oh
like a,
wow.
it's a reliving incarnation, right? So like, you're connected to every other previous guru's, the understanding, all of their memories are accessible within inside of you, at least in some traditions. It depends on your tradition, but yeah.
That's awesome, because that reminds me exactly of what I was reading earlier today. It said that Pythagoras knew 3 of his previous lives. So, and then like, and from the little bit that I know of the Pythagoreans, in a way, when Pythagoras passes down all of his knowledge to the ones that he's teaching. So like, in a way, they become the guru after he dies. So I mean, that's beautiful how I can see the comparison in it.
Oh yeah, you can see there's a lot of this stuff, right? Like, you see it within many of the philosophical schools, right? And you see, like, within both the Greek and the Indian tradition. Like, this is something that frustrates me, because it's like, when we a lot of modern scholars, they look at the Greek tradition and they look at the philosophy and they say, oh, it's not religious, it's all philosophy, right? And then they look at the Indian tradition and they go, it's not philosophy, it's all religion. And it's like, it's somewhere in between for both of them, you know what I mean? And it's like, you have to have that nuanced understanding in order to truly grasp what these people are getting at. Like Heraclitus in one time spurns all religion, but then he spends the last part of his life in the temple, right, of Artemis till he dies. It's like, you can't tell me he hates all religion if he's doing that.
Yeah. So one thing that I've been reading I'm in the nouns Dynasakya, and I'm known as Dynasakya. Sorry, I'm not the best with pronouncing some of these
Oh,
words.
don't worry, don't worry.
But he is going to war with the Indians, right? So I was watching a show one time, and in one of the Vedas, it talks about like a war going on with in the Hindu tradition. Do you think that war is what they're speaking of?
No, I think what they're speaking of. Oh, so what you're talking. I think what you're referencing is the Mahabharata, which is like the great. Within the Indian tradition, you have like a bunch of different epics, but you have two central epics, and they both involve grand wars. One is the Mahabharata, which tells about like the war. This is where Krishna shows up, and you have the war between these two families over like the nation of India, basically. And then you have the second epic is the Ramayana, which is all about Ram and his wife Sita and how Sita gets abducted and taken to Lanka, and how Ram and his crew have to go back and rescue her, and then a big war. So like it's like war is such a big theme when you're talking about any of these cultures at the time. What I really think Dionysica is talking about is Alexander's conquests,
Oh
right?
yeah, in that DLS meet, it was trying to when they tried to deify Dionysus, and as he was making his campaign, the Indians thought he was Dionysus coming through.
Well, what's interesting is you see in both traditions, and you should check out. There's a really awesome scholar. I tell everyone to read them. Elaine Danilou. Okay, this is one of my first interest into a lot of this. Actually, I have one of his books right here that's really awesome. Shiva in the Primordial Tradition. Well worth reading. But there's another great one he has called Gods of, I think it's Love and Ecstasy, which is all about the connection between Dionysus and Shiva. And he makes a really good argument that these are one figure, and he connects them all the way back to a single tradition in Minoan Crete that then spread across the Bronze Age. That's his hypothesis, right? And that's kind of what his hypothesis is what brought me here and turned me on to Ammon's work. So
Awesome. I was also reading in this J.R.S. Mead Orpheus book. I keep referencing it because it's my freshest read, but it brought me to that level of, and I mean, of course, since I've been a part of this group and following Ammon and you and like the Gnostic Informant is what introduced me to all of y'all and Ariel. But since I've been like with you all, and then I started reading some of the books that like are suggested, and then I started doing dives on my own. It takes those simple stories, those myths of these stories, and it breaks them down to where I can understand them at their fundamental level in like not just the moral aspect but the spiritual aspect. So it takes it and it totally changes everything. Like since I've had the ears to hear, I hear songs differently. Whenever I go back and I read a myth, it's totally different now. It's amazing.
yeah, because you can see the images, what these things are trying to invoke. And what's wild is that, yeah, when you get into art and stuff, sometimes these people aren't even, conscious of these images that they're invoking.
Oh yeah, truly.
you
Like
know?
and some of the art I love how you brought that up. Do you like some of the art? Like, remember that one painting that I posted in the Discord? It was that lady sitting on that black orb, and that had the lady to the side with the mask off. Do you think all that symbolism was like intentional, or do you think it was just a part of the art?
I mean, I'm not too sure of that piece offhand. I'd have to go back and check it out. But in my scope, it doesn't matter whether it's intentional or not. It's there, right? And then, like
It's
for
the
me, I'm
muse.
looking for synchronicities, and I'm going off of my own. Like, I'm basically a crazy person at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Besides the people within the group, you try to explain what we're learning, and they look at us crazy.
Oh yeah, well, that's always been a thing for me, right? People, this is an ongoing realization for a lot of people is that like talking about death, talking about spirituality, talking about philosophy, these are scary topics. And there is a large segment of society that just refuses to engage, right? And then on top of that, like you have to engage with all of these philosophies that vilify this kind of approach, like we're engaging with a magical pagan approach, right? That's invoking images, that's embracing the aesthetics, that's engaging with Mother Nature. It's something that's been vilified, right? It's something that's been attacked, you know?
Oh yeah. So one thing that I think I should talk about, and I mentioned it in the group, but it still fascinates me because as I'm at work and I'm doing mindless things, my mind's racing. So Athena, she's my patron goddess. She's the one that I hold like the most high, her and Hades. But Athena is so special and so powerful because Metis is her mother, right? But in a prophecy, Zeus was told that if he had a child with Metis, it would overthrow him. So he swallowed Metis whole. But and somehow Athena was still born. But Metis is also connected to Faunus. It's the female version of Faunus, basically, even though he's hermaphroditic, but it's basic kind of really he's kind of portrayed as a man, as Faunus, right? That's how I see him in a way.
It doesn't matter, right? These are things they're beyond gender, right? You can perceive it in any way. It's beyond that conception. But yeah, yeah, no, for sure, right? I see where you're coming from. Well, this gets into the cycles, right? And this is something that I always find super interesting, and it really helps explain a lot of the Saturnian kind of stuff, right? So everything exists in these cyclic forms of kind of descending, right? So at the beginning, right, we have Uranos, right, and Gaia, and then Uranos gets he's ruling over, but he doesn't allow things to go forward. They create the Titans, but then that's it. So what happens? Kronos slays Uranos, divides him, right? Creates the separation, and then we get the creation of the gods, and he swallows the phallus, and he takes that place, and he takes Gaia, right? And they have that next level generation. And then we see the same thing happen again, right? So Kronos is said to live over the golden age, right? And all of this stuff. And humanity is able to prosper and whatnot. But eventually, what happens is that you have that calcification again. And it needs to be this separating, right? So Zeus has to come forward and dethrone Kronos, right? Even in what we also see is like Kronos refuses to let himself, right? He does everything in his power to maintain. He becomes paranoid. He lashes out at his children, right? But ultimately, he's overthrown, right, with the help of Gaia. He's tricked with the Omphalos stone, and Zeus slays him, and then Zeus swallows the phallus, right? And he takes on again. He takes that throne. He takes that position of power. But, now we're seeing that cycle again, right? And then there's all this talk, right? And again, with these cycles, there's always generations, right? You have the gods, the Titans, humanity. What comes next, right? And this is what always is super interesting to me when you have all this talk of Athena, because like she, right, you said she's Metis in one sense, right? She's that divine wisdom at the beginning. But
she's the daughter of the Protogonos.
Right? But she's also said to be the wisdom that escapes forth from Zeus, right? She's burst forth from Zeus when he dies, right? When he's dethroned, right? And she becomes, right? She's the child to come, representative of that next phase.
Yeah. So do you think, in a way, since like Zeus was born physically, do you think that Athena wasn't just born physically, or like only spiritually? Because wisdom like comes with everybody, right? If you pray for it with her, you'll definitely get it if you mean it. So do you think, in a way, that, like you said, history, that cycle has to be repeated? If say in a way they cut the belly of Zeus, would Metis come out and give birth to Athena as the way of the divine child? Do you think that would be a cycle that has to be repeated?
Well, what I see is like it's a cycle that repeats in a sense, but if you notice, there's an unfolding and an evolution each time, right? So from Uranos and Kronos, we have the reign of the Titans, and then with Zeus you have the reign of the gods. Now we're gonna get the reign, and then what comes next after that, right? Where's the next evolution, and that's what it's interesting to me. And Ariel is asking, doesn't Zeus castrate? And okay, yeah, I mean, if we're getting technical, right? None of them die. Uranos becomes the sky. Kronos divides him; he becomes the sky. And then Zeus
could also become Aphrodite too, because from his genitals, Aphrodite was born.
Exactly.
And like you never hear of Uranos again, ever. I
Yeah.
haven't seen anything mentioned of Ornos after his castration.
Right. But this is what happens, right? They get, they don't get destroyed. They become imprisoned, or they get, transformed into something else, right? So like Kronos, he's functions still, right? He's imprisoned within Hades, and he functions as Hades, right? In a sense, he operates in that form. He's bound to the earth, and there's all that stuff of, like, what are we talking about? How like he's like, he's bound, and right, like, what is the role of Kronos? He enforces, and he makes sure that that change unfolds, right? Like, one of my favorite ways I heard about, like, Kronos being described is he's representative that person standing behind. He's death, right? He's that force
Yeah,
standing behind you with the knife, and if you do not move forward, he stabs you. If you don't keep pushing forward, and either you fall on your own accord and you die, or or Kronos catches you. Either way, eventually he consumes you. you know but that
he
allows you
definitely.
to be reborn and to transform, right? There has to be, like, it's always this question is, can people truly change, right? Can you truly, this is an ongoing thing, like, that I'm starting to understand about magic, right? Like, the big reason why a lot of these figures, like, in the stories, fail is because they resist. They do not transform, they do not become, right? Like, it's a becoming process. And these people, like, if you look at, like, the story of Jason, right, in the Odyssey, or Jason in the Argonauts, right? What fundamentally, he goes on this big quest and he achieves all of this stuff. He gets the girl, he gets the fleece, but what happens? He goes back home and nothing happens, right?
He
He
becomes
tries.
ungrateful. He doesn't
Exactly.
give thanks to the
No,
woman. Like all of them, they never give thanks to the woman.
no, he
Ever.
abandons the magic. It's all like, right? He abandons everything to return back to his original state. And this is why he's ultimately, you don't even hear his story, because he's not even, he gives up being a magician. He's a failure. But why he fails is because he doesn't become transformed. He returns back to where he starts, you know? Or like, in the Bacchae, why, right? Why does Pentheus fail? It's because Pentheus resists. He refuses to see Dionysus for who he is. He gets all holy and noble, and then, he tries to take a peek. And so he's ripped apart.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But it's justified. It's to teach a lesson, it's to, so that in his next incarnation, he knows better to embrace change, right? Otherwise, there are consequences.
I like how you mentioned that. I'm about to bring up, since we're talking about the Argonautica and you just talked about the Bacchae. I was reading. Oh, well, I wasn't reading. I was listening to the Argonautica on Scribe today. And when Heracles is first introduced, it tells him that he comes into the market and he has a black great boar, and it's in chains, and he sets it down, and then he enters the story of the Argonautica. So what do we know? What do we know about the black boar? Who does that represent? It represents
Yeah,
Kronos, and it's in the
Kronos.
chains. And also in the Bacchae, it talks about how when they're in that cave and they have that fawn skin circle, and Rhea is playing it's either the Phrygian flutes or the drums, and she said, and it
The
states in
drums.
it that she's beating time.
Mhm.
So what that means to me is, did they time travel? Because Heracles is in all of these different like time zones, it seems like, as is Dionysus. You know what I mean? Because Dionysus also fights Perseus. He's also known to be around Heracles in you know what I mean, in his stories. But Heracles also, I don't I don't know how, like, before I understood that his time zone with his labors, it even says this. Like it says in the Organica, from what I've read, it said or heard listening, that it talks about him before his feats, his 12 labors, right? But then in the Organica, it talks about him getting the Hippolytus's girdle too, in the midst of all that. So it's like it bounces back and forth. So the timeline is different. You know what I mean? I think that's fascinating, and it makes me wonder. You know what I mean? how important is that? And is that a factor to play into the mysteries? Is that something the mysteries can show?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting thought. I definitely think that there is talk of time travel throughout the Greek tradition. And there is that aspect of like this going on. But I wonder about Heracles. Like I don't know. That's something to dig into. But I think you may be onto something because I mean it makes sense, right? Because in one sense I see the gods as right. I mean, the demigods are a bit different, but the gods are these images that are beyond time and space, right? And they can be drawn down. They can take possession of people. They can, but that's only, that's just an aspect, and that's only for limitation. Why not a demigod, right? So why can't he kind of incarnate when he's needed? I don't
They
know.
say they put Heracles in the stars and in his stories, and when he went through those 12 labors, and I'm starting to go back and reread those, and I'm looking at those since I've been listening to Ammon and you and all the work on the Discord, which is amazing. That I'm looking at these as ritualistic ways, right? Because Heracles was a little bit different from all of the other demigods. It seems like to me, because he was so powerful. Like he went down and he wrestled Hades, literally. He wrestled Hades, pretty much beat him up. He dragged Cerberus out. So that means that he had to, in a way, die or go down in there. And we're
Oh, yeah.
talking about the dote and antidote. And then he's got, again, which it's I kind of feel bad about talking about this, but it's true. He's got Ganymede, right? The cupbearer. Do you think that was essential for him to descend the dote, to descend into the underworld, to die? And then when he came back, everything changed for him, right?
This is understood as clear, like this is something that's hard, but you need that antidote. And it's an antidote that, at least in the Bronze Age, was created in a person, right? You know, um, it it gets complicated. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, actually, I think I sent this to you on Discord. I need to find it in my notes. And they talk about the cup in that JRS Mead book. And remember, I sent it. It's called Crater, and that's what they called it. And it says a cup offered by a deity to the souls to drink of the wine of wisdom. And what it also said in there is that you have to be found. The deity has to find you worthy of drinking this cup. And then when you drink upon this cup, you see the true things of everything. And it also talks about this in Timaeus and Plato, that how everything in front of us, we either perceive by personal opinion or we receive it by intellect. So what we see in front of us may not always be, you know what I mean? And how most people see it is by personal opinion. So when you have the intellect, you see it for what it is, the true reality of things. And that's what that cup can bring. And with Ammon's work, he talked about that cup with, Jesus. And I'm seeing that the origins of that cup go back to the crater. You know what I mean?
Well, they go back to Medea, right? They go
Yeah,
back
well,
to
true.
they go back to the origin of the mystery, and it's how she's able to draw down the moon, right? Again, it come right. It's all, again, like you were saying, right? It's the dote and antidote. You need the cup because it's what brings you back to life after death, you know, and right in the mystery, like this is beyond paramount, right? So
I was also reading about the mysteries, and I can't remember if it was in Thomas Taylor's the Platonist, or it was in that J.R.S. Mead book. But you see, they talk about the seven planetary spheres, right? Well, they talk about eight too, but mainly the seven. And with the seven, each come their own creative, intelligent force, right? Or the dividing force. So they say that in these mysteries, you have to master them, right? And then I see this with, like, in some of the Masonic symbolism, you see the seven stairs, right? Or is it the seven ringed ladder? So like you still see the mysteries today evident in the secret societies. And it
oh
makes me
yeah,
wonder, like, and I know, it doesn't make me wonder. I know where they got it all from. You know what I mean?
of
I think it's
course.
beautiful.
No, it's interesting, right? How these things have managed to persist and survive in different ways. You know, even through such incredible persecution, because these images have power. And again, right, I keep using that word, but it's that is the key to all of this, right? It's invoking those images, because the image is alive. It's a living thing, that can persist across time and space, right?
How these mysteries, how I perceive it and how I've been reading, is it's the mysteries is what helps you ascend and break this physical body. You have to overcome your body. You was talking about overthrowing, right? As
Yeah,
ourselves as humans, in a way, our soul, that fractal light to make it illuminate, we have to overthrow our body to destroy those desires of the body,
of
right?
course. Everything, right?
But
It's all cyclical, too, and it's different levels, right? Like again, when you're saying about the planetary spheres, right? And you see that, like you're talking about how you have to, you have to overcome each of them in a sense. You have to draw each of these forces down, right? And you got to remember that these planets are living images. So when you
oh
draw
yeah,
them down, you're drawing down each of these are stars, right? The Greek, it's they use that word and it takes on a very specific connotation, right? Like these things have a living will. They're a daimonic force, and they're meant to embody you and give you these certain characteristics. When you draw down Mercury, you are embodied by Mercury, right? And you
yeah,
gain that ability. The same thing with Mars and Venus, or Saturn, any of them, right? Or the
that's
moon.
beautiful. To take on that deity because they are like living organisms. So with that book that I was telling you about that I got given to me in jail. Also, I should say I had a dream of Athena while I was in that jail when I was learning that, because the 3 times that I cried, I felt an overwhelming force. It was like a loving embrace wrapped around me and a higher understanding that I was like, I'm here. I figured it out. I figured out what I believe in. You know what I mean? And she came to me in a dream and she told me to protect what I believe in from the Christians. That's the one dream that I had from Athena. But also, in that book, it talked about James Lovelock, Gaia hypothesis, right? So he described the earth, which I love this too, because what I believe in, the earth is alive. It's Gaia. I can walk outside and see a living, breathing Titan. So what the Gaia hypothesis is he says that the earth is a superorganism, and how he referred to the earth was like a beehive, right? So a beehive to function, it has to have all of the workers and everything in unison, in sync. You know what I mean? To make the colony grow and thrive. So with what James Lovelock was saying, that the earth itself, to the things that are connected to it, like the animals, right? The animals know when a natural disaster is going to happen. The trees know when rain's going to happen because the leaves turn upside down. And the earth can grow, it can heal itself, and it's a god because it can provide life and it can destroy. And how the tectonic plates move and how all the volcanoes are connected, it's like it's blood flow, the magma, all of that going down. And he said that it was an intelligent, all-knowing force, right? So I mean, if you look at it like the ground is its body, right? You can put a seed into the ground and it grows. You know what I mean? And it has all of these things, the rain and all that. And that to me, that is a super organism. It's a living, breathing thing.
I couldn't agree more. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And yeah, right. And what we're seeing right now, and like what I think the greatest sin of the monotheistic religions, and even some of some of the Indian and Chinese traditions, is that they denigrate nature, right? They destroy the natural world. They remove its sacredness. You know,
Oh
they
yeah,
turn it into something that can be destroyed for human, for human purposes, right? They
oh yeah.
denigrate it, and like that's what we're going through in our modern times. And what I think we're seeing is like eventually what's going to happen is we're going to make our the it we're going to make it so that the earth is untenable for us, you know
Oh yeah.
and then the earth will go through a transformation and become something different, and we'll give birth to something new, and it won't
Oh
be
yeah.
us, right? This is the great thing. Like I feel this, we're entering this apocalyptic moment. An apocalypse can either be a rebirth or an end, you know and this is the
See, I
thing, we
love
need to regain that respect and that love of the natural world, or we're gonna destroy ourselves. You know, we will make
That's
the earth untenable to us, and then she'll reject us and create something new in our place.
exactly. So with how the origin story is that when Oranos and Gaia, like, they conceived their children, there was three races from what I remember. There was the Cyclops, and then it's I call them the hecahedrons, but I know that's not the right word. But it was the 100-handed beings. I think. Oh man, I had some of their names, and then they had the Titans. But Oranos told Gaia to keep two of those races into the earth, right? And so he did that, and that was one of the reasons why she rebelled. But from the war with the gods and the Titans, from the ashes of the Titans, man rose from that. So when the world itself, again, because Gaia, it seems like to me, through every single usurpation, like the rebellion, Gaia is the main key in it. She's always one of the playing factors, right?
She's the key, right? Wait, like when we look at the cycles, right? She's there with Uranus, she's there with Kronos, she's there with Zeus, right? She's the
So
only constant.
with mankind, I feel like losing its connection with the gods and goddesses. We don't have that muse like we do. You know what I mean? We have that different source of intellect, and some other spiritual people may have that. But for the most part, people are Christian. And what gets me about Christians, I'm sorry, going off topic, but Christians, they praise this God, but they don't understand their Bible. Their God is the one that destroys them. And then they blame it on Satan. Like, I don't get it. It's funny.
Wow, systems of control, right? Systems of control. A lot of religion is about that, right? There's a difference between spirituality and like magical practice and religion. And like this is something that I think is really important because like a lot of people don't understand, at least from my perspective. Like, and I'd like your take on this because like when I'm reading these ancient texts, right? I'm not taking them literally. I don't think that they're sacred. I think that they have images. I think that they are a living thing that can be resurrected and brought into the present, and that we can
Yes.
work with them in the present to create into the future. But I'm interested in bringing it into the now and engaging with it in a magical, practical way in the now, like through that invocation, right? Like I'm not interested in literal truth or what was actually, I don't know. What is your take? Like I don't. So much of
I love
religion
it.
is about these control, and it's about creating a mythological past. I'm not, no, I want to project into the future.
I love what you just said because the Kabbalion, there's two parts to this. The hymn of Hermes that I was telling you about that I listened to by J.R.S. Mead, which was beautiful, in the Kabbalion, right? And in Faunus itself, and with Kronos. What does the beginning of all creation, the one thing that we have that the gods have themselves, right? The one thing that connects us to our divinity, right? It's not in front of us. Our divinity is not in front of us. It's when we close our eyes and we open up our mind's eye. So we have that power of creation, right? That's why the gods and goddesses love poets and musicians so much. The first beginning of creation is in the mind. You think it in the mind, right?
Yeah.
And it's even it's even with sex, with whatever you do. When if you make a child or whatever, that starts as a thought, right?
Yeah.
Everything starts with a thought. So then we can manifest that, and it bursts out. And with the Kabbalion, it says that that's one of the connections. How I perceived it is that's our connection with the divinity, because we can create too. Right here, we are the creators of our reality also. And then the hymns of Hermes also said that once those go through their gnosis, how it put it, in their illumination, that usually the initiates or the Nephites, how they said it, become musicians and poets. Because what's one of the ways to best project an image, or like a thought, like to best project an image without creating it as a sculpture, is to play music or to write poetry and give it to those
Right.
people in that mind. It's like planting that seed with the mysteries, right? When you go through the mysteries, I feel like, even though I haven't been initiated by how I perceive it, when you got the mystery with
You've been
Aphrodite
initiated.
and Adonis, yeah, but I haven't went through those. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Aphrodite and Adonis, right? Adonis, he dies and she's chasing after him, and he gets rebirthed, and you know what I mean, all that stuff. And then you got the Bacchic mysteries with Amphialus, really, I mean, that's how I perceive it, because Amphialus dies, right? And he becomes like a seed in a way. So does Adonis, because they both have flowers or plants associated with them. Amphialus becomes the grapevine, and he's that seed. And then you have Demeter with Persephone, right? She can come up 6 months out of the year and then goes back down. It's like a seed. So when you go through those mysteries, you take that deity and you take that seed and you let it sprout in your mind, and that's where you get the beautiful knowledge and the growth. I feel like you
Oh, for
take that as
sure.
a seed.
Right? Well, with magic, I always like to describe it as the plan before the plan, right? It's about creating a conception of your mind and then projecting that conception into the future, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like it's an act of transformation. That's the entire purpose of it, right? Like we're any kind of magic you're engaging with. Like really wild thing happened to me recently. So I was, a little bit confused about this. And I was kind of thinking about it to the side, but I was doing some research into the sortes, right? Because I want to do a video on here going into the history and talking about examples and whatnot. So I was looking for examples, and I just happened to randomly come across this book. And it was by this guy, Charles Leland, I believe, or yeah, trying to think of the name. But anyway, it's Virgil and Other Stories, okay? And I was just like, oh, this is cool. And it's talking about this guy was an anthropologist who went to parts of Italy and collected all of these stories while traveling around, and they're like authentic myths that like come from that area. And this is at the 1800s or so. But I'm flipping through the book, and I just randomly come to this chapter on this story. It's called Balsalbo, or I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but and it lays out the whole idea of like possession in that relationship and what happens, because and it doesn't do it till the second half of the story, because in the first half what it is you have, I'll just tell it here because it's so cool. You don't mind, eh?
Oh no, you sent it to me. It's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful
Yeah,
story.
yeah. But okay, so basically what happens is you have this horrible miser person who's really abusive to his children, and he always was restrictive. He's on his deathbed and he's dying. And Virgil shows up, and Virgil decides that he is going to cast out the spirit of this horrible man, this miser person, and he offers this other demon to take his place. And he says, if I'll let you go into the body of this man if you agree to raise his children. Oh, I think we lost you, Nick. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you
Okay.
see me now?
Awesome. Yeah, perfect. So the deal is, if the demon promises to take care of this man's children, he can take over his body. And the demon is kind of like, well, I've lived all these different lives and whatnot. Why not? So he agrees, right? And he decides he's going to take care of these children. And at first, he's teaching these kids about how to lie and how to cheat and how to swindle everyone. And, he's kind of like this weird kind of narcissistic character, but he starts to fall in love with the children. He really starts to fall in love with them. And he even is willing to personally sacrifice for them. And one of the kids, the eldest daughter, recognizes, and she sees this. And then later, as the story goes on, Balsalbo starts getting old and sick, and she recognizes that he's going to die. And she recognizes through her own interest in her own will, just because of the difference in change in behavior, that this is not her father. This is someone else. This is another spirit that's entered his body. So she reaches out to Virgil and asks him what she can do. How can she help Balsalbo, right? And Virgil tells her that he's going to die, right? And he's going to die a final end because he can't be saved, And so I think that part's a bit of a corruption, but I still think that there's this idea that if something bad's going to happen to him if he dies with this body. But what Virgil tells her is that you have to enter into a pact with Balsalbo. You have to give your life for his. And then together, you'll be able to create a new being, something greater than yourself. And you'll be able to live a greater life in the beyond. You'll be able to persist in a sense because balsalbo has the spirit that exists beyond the body, right? So what you're doing is you're forming this loving relationship, and through this mutual sacrifice of giving each other lives for each other, balsalbo, the demon, sacrifices for the daughter, and the daughter sacrifices for the demon. They both give you their lives for each other. They're given ionic life at the end of the story. They're able to live as one being in free. It's
That
wild.
is beautiful. That is beautiful. That is. So one of the I'm sure you've read Hevion or
Yeah,
read through it.
I've read lots of it, but it's hard to digest that stuff.
What always fascinated me, and one of my favorite parts with him is his ages of man, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ages, you know what I mean? And in one of the ages, when Zeus creates man, so like another thing I love about what I believe in is that it doesn't just explain the origin of the universe, you know what I mean? It doesn't just give, you know what I mean, a basic thing, but it also talks about the different races of man. And then throughout history, you can see that there was different races of men, right? And one of them was a being so powerful because it was man and female put together, right? And it was like a circular being with 4 arms and 4 legs, and it was male and female. And Zeus feared them so much because they were so powerful, because they were so in sync. They had that full masculine and divine feminine energy, right? That he had to destroy them. That's what that story kind of reminded me of a little bit.
Yeah, right. It's beautiful stuff, right? But you see this idea of twins constantly within the Greek, right? Like with Artemis and with Apollo, right? Lucifer and Lucifera,
Yeah.
And again, right? Like that idea, like you're looking, right? Like this is why you get all this romantic ideas where, people are looking for their soulmate, their other half to complete their whole being. And there's that understanding that you need to do that, right? You need to enter into this, that we're half a person, and it's only through love of the other that we can become whole, and I think that's deeply profound. And you even see that with this idea of possession, right? You have to embrace and fall in love with the daimon, you have
Oh yes.
in order to transform yourself and to become something greater, right? To grow beyond man, you have to become something beyond human.
Oh yeah. That's another thing that gets me with what I believe in is the daimon. Because like we learn, especially with the PGM and some of the other books, that we all have a daimon in us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then with the gods and goddesses, there's different classes with them, right? So like Nike isn't a god necessarily. She's a daimon. So is Nemesis and Anake, which is a necessity, and she's always in everything too. I
Or
don't
like
fully understand her.
yeah, they're all daimons. Yeah.
Lisa, Gearus. But one of the things also is that it makes me want to wonder, like, I love my gods and goddesses and I won't discriminate, but sometimes it makes me have to want to go through the myths again and classify the gods and goddesses as a daimon, because it even makes me think about my patron goddess Athena, which I love so much. You know what I mean? That's done a lot for me. She's given me a new way of life through this, all of this. I prayed to find my people for her, and I found you all. You know what I mean?
Mm.
But she wasn't physically born as like Dionysus or Apollo or Artemis, but she's that wisdom. She's that guidance for Zeus. So it makes me wonder, is she a daimon? Because that phallus, in a way, that ruling phallus is a daimon too, is what it says in the Duvernay Papyrus.
Yeah,
That's a daimon. So like, would she be classified as a daimon?
I
Or
think
would
so.
she be
I think so, because what I see is, don't get too caught up in thinking of the daimons as so much lesser. They're more, rather
oh
see
no, we're
them as
not.
more immediate, right? Whereas I see the gods as they representative of primordial forces, right? Like the titans and the gods, right? They represent these powers, right? Like Zeus is that patriarchal force of control, right? It's trying to like bring order and logic, you know. Um, whereas like if you look at where you look at Athena is something like wisdom. I mean, it's harder to, it's a nuance, right? And I think it's like it's something that you understand when you start to engage with the image. Like you're already recognizing it, right? By
Yeah.
engaging with Athena, you're understanding that she's a daimon, you know,
Yeah.
right? Because again, she's born into the world, right? She's the child to come. There's a closeness, right? There's an immediacy to these energies, right? And like it's the same thing with Dionysus. I think that Dionysus is a daimon, right? But like Dionysus takes on an even more immediate sense because he's physically incarnated, right? He
Oh,
takes
yeah.
on,
He so much things from his first life with Zagreus from getting ripped apart. Each of that could represent the human souls being ripped apart in the higher and lower egos.
oh
You
yeah,
know what I
right.
mean?
He's the
And,
descending, like he's this image, he's a reflection of Faunus, right? Faunus rips himself apart to cause creation. And then Dionysus is constantly ripped apart to what? To perpetuate creation, right? He's
oh,
the
yes.
sacrificial lamb, right? And it's also showing you the way to return, to reassemble. How do you go back to the monad, right? You need that
Oh, yeah.
madness. Only
I,
through the absurdity of Dionysus.
the power and the might of Dionysus is beautifully portrayed in the Bacchae because it not only has Dionysus in the flesh walking around, but it has him labeled as the roaring one, right? So he's
Yeah,
inside of
Romeo.
all the minds and the Bacchans, and he's this actual force, right? He's this spirit that you get the roaring one inside your mind. I think it's
The
beautiful.
wind.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, no, it's true, right? Like he takes on this immediacy, right? Like that's why he is an initiator of the mystery, right? He's showing
Oh
you
yeah.
the way to Aphrodite. You know, they're in conjunction, like you know, they work together, right? Like
Oh
we
yeah.
see it in the Bacchae, right? We're gonna dance in revelry for Kybele, you know. We're gonna show you the
Oh,
mother and all this stuff, right? Like he's not doing it. You're not dancing for Dionysus, right?
yeah. So one of the things with that too, I took that imagery in and I tried to place myself in that fawn skin, right? So
Mhm.
you have I think because it represents when they're in that cave with the fawn skin, it doesn't only represent Dionysus, but it represents Zeus in a way because he is another form of Zeus, right? Because when the curiates or the Corybantes, the nurses of Zeus, in his protectors, his guardians in a way, because they wanted to drown out the cries of him so Kronos wouldn't hear him. So they have not only these people, these women dancing around Zeus, and Dionysus, but they have these symbols, or I think it's called, and these symbols when they bash them together, they produce that frequency and that sound, right? And it puts you in that state. And there you also have the beat of drums, and you have other things going on. You have the wine flowing and the incense going in this circle, right? And you're getting all these energies. You know what I mean? So with
Yeah.
those missions, I can see it. I feel like I can be there in that feeling, right? With those symbols, I wonder how they was made. They say bronze, right? But I wonder how the intricacies of the inner lining of it was when they bashed it together, what that produced. You know what I mean?
No, no, I totally know what you mean. I so get into all this with the instruments because you know I'm a musician and like trying to figure out the sounds that they were into because they were into a lot of like very complicated stuff, but very different than what we produce. And it's essential, right? Like if you're reading any of this stuff, it's lyric poetry for the lyre. How could like
Yeah.
we're automatically we're not perceiving it as it's meant to be perceived. It's not sung and it's not accompanied by lyre, you know. And oftentimes, then you would also get the things like the olos, which is that two reeded instrument, and then you would also get the flute, and you would have drums, right? Like we were talking about in the Bacchae, they talk about how Rhea, right, her sacred instrument is the drum, and how she beats the drum, and all that
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
you know. So yeah, you see all of these instruments take on a very important powerful role within all of these rites, and the music is everything, right? It's like because you know what what does music fundamentally do? It
It
decorates
makes you feel
time,
different.
but it
There's
does
two
it transform you.
there's
But it
there
exists
my
within
bad.
time, right? It's magic of time, right? It's Saturnian by its very nature. You know, we're invoking that
It's
element. You know, you're
preserved.
creating, right?
The musician lives forever in a way, and so does the poet, right? That's why I feel like they become once they go through the initiations and they become illumined, because that music and that poetry lives on forever. And I've been studying a little bit about frequencies and hertz and whatnot, or like I can't remember. It's kilohertz or hertz, right? Or like how the frequency sounds. And there's and in music too, there's a certain way. And then I remember reading this, that there's a difference between three decimals, right? 432, I do believe, is supposed to have you have a feeling of, I think it's hertz, or yeah, I'm not all the way smart with that, but I remember the numbers and what the meanings are. But 432 is supposed to make you feel like wonderful and creative and happy and enthusiastic. And then you raise it up three and it inspires fear. It inspires fear. Just three decimals. It's
Right.
crazy.
No, this is something you can take any film, okay, any film that you love, remove the soundtrack. Tell me if it plays on your emotions in the same way, right? Tell me if it invokes what it normally invokes, you know? Like it doesn't. Like
Oh no.
you know, like music is transformative and it's essential, right? And yeah, but
Sorry, I had to plug
you
my
just
charger in real quick.
oh yeah, no worries, no worries.
So another thing is that, have you heard of the story of the lyre, like the first lyre, right? Have you heard of the story of it?
Oh, liar? Yeah, yeah.
So with the first lyre, Hermes and Apollo, they had a falling out. So the baby Hermes, when he was born, because he's the god of thieves too. Baby Hermes was so crafty in his ways that he went and stole the cattle of Apollo, right? And this enraged Apollo. This enraged him, right? So they went before Zeus to try to clear it up, right? Well, Zeus just laughed because it was baby Hermes, you know what I mean? And he was proud of his little crafty son, you know what I mean? So what he made Hermes and Apollo do is reconcile. So with Hermes and his ingenuity, he created the first lyre, the lyre, out of a tortoise shell, and I think it was a stick of some sort, and I think it was cow intestines or some kind of animal part. And he
Yeah, animal
made a
guy. Yeah.
beautiful 7-stringed lyre that he gave to Apollo. This charger ain't working. I still got 10%, so we got a little bit left.
Okay.
But he made this beautiful lyre, and it formed a bond between Apollo and Hermes. And what I think about it is the number 7. It's beautiful because I've also heard that the planets also give off their own frequency, their own sound. And
Mhm.
it's 7 strings, right? And Orpheus mastered those 7 strings, and his patron was Apollo. And some things it says that Dionysus was, but in the others it says it was Apollo. You know how the philosophers are and the poets, they all differ. But
Well, I think it's
I feel
important. I
like,
think it's probably both, right? These are
yeah,
interconnected forces, right? They're both forces of revealing, right? Apollo is the sunlight, you know. Anyway, and musical, like they're connected. Keep going.
yeah, I feel like that's number 7 with the 7 strings and the 7 planetary spheres. I feel like it's all connected in a way. It's another little symbolism hidden within the myths to make people think, you know what I mean? To make people wonder, you know what I mean? It's another one of those mysteries.
Well, yeah, what it does is it allows you to invoke those energies, right? It allows you to play on those melodies and connect to the. They talk about the harmony of the spheres and the music of the spheres, and you can get right into this and stuff. Like the planets are bombarding us with different frequencies. You can go and
Oh, yeah.
like you can listen to the frequency of Saturn. It is off-putting. It's in, and we're being bombarded by that 24/7. And then even the universe itself is radiating. Like I think it's a B flat, which is kind of interesting because a
Oh,
lot
wow.
of love songs are in the key of B flat. So you got to
Oh,
wonder, right?
wow.
You know,
That's that Eros right there, man.
right? That Eros,
That's
right?
amazing. I
No,
wonder if
so
we
it's
could
cool.
we could do some research on here between the Discord and all the bright minds on that. If we could find the frequencies and put those in chords with the planets, I wonder what kind of notes that we could get. You know what I mean? Also with the stars. I mean, they even have it as a black hole. The other
I
day I
bet
was scrolling
you
through
a
Facebook,
lot of the
and a black
Greek.
hole produces the sound.
Oh yeah, I bet you a lot of the if we go and we dig, a lot of the Greeks have already done this. But you're right. We can
Oh,
also confirm and we can elaborate, you know. It's wild to think about. There's so much there. But since your phone is almost dead there, I think we should probably start winding down, right?
Oh yeah. One
Uh,
more thing that I wanted
yeah.
to say on here is when I was telling you about that Orphic fragment, right? Today at work in the past few days, I've been on that imagery. I was trying to put that in my head. So what it
Which Orphic
said in
fragment again? Give me that image just so that I
the
know.
Orphic fragment, it was talking about how when Faunus and Kronos like manifested, right, and they created this great beast, right, and it's also in the Bible, with the four beasts. But in this version, so how would explain it? Imagine this: you have one body, right, and it says that it has three main heads, right? It has the man, it has the head of a bull, it has the head of a ram, and it has the head of a man, right? And then it also has this thing where it says it has many serpent forms with various animal heads on it, right? So how I've seen this body is a red body, right? Because I had a vision of this in a way, not with the heads, but a red flashing orb, and it let me know that it's inside of my mind and everybody else's mind. So with all these heads connected to this one body, right? It's this one body that has all the heads of the animal, right? And one half of it's on the earth, and then the other half is in the water with all the marine life, right? And then in the background, it is pure white, it is pure light, and it's pure darkness, representing also Faunus, which represents light, and Nyx, which represents darkness, right? And in a way, it's all connected to the same force within our mind, within our consciousness, that creative force. That's how I pictured it. And it talks about that in that Orphic fragment on the Discord. I wish I could bring it up, but my phone won't let me.
No, that's beautiful, man. I love that. No, I totally agree. Right? I think you're seeing it very very clearly. Yeah. No, it's powerful stuff, right? When you really get into it, you can see all the different layers of the cycle, you know, and
And
how
then,
all creation's unfolding. It's a
and then
lot
how
more
they
in
messed it
depth.
up. They messed it up in the Bible by separating those forces, by separating everything, and trying to make that deity something that they can't
Well,
even explain. Is it Jesus? Is it his father? I mean, who the
no,
hell
it's
is
not
this
the
guy? You know
separation
what I
that's the
mean?
issue. It's the conflation. It's the reduction. It's the reduction, right? It's the dismissing of all of these other forces, and it's degrading them and destroying them. That's the issue, right? It's the destruction of images. This is what's essential, right? Like for magic to work and all of this, right? The image is alive. That's what we're connecting with. When we're invoking this poetry, it's alive. It's a living being in a sense, right? We're connecting to, you're resurrecting it, you're bringing it forth, you're having a conversation. It's palpable. What do the Christians want to do? They want to destroy the image, right?
Yes, and then use that image to destroy everybody else, to
Right?
inspire fear.
Right, and it's not just them. Any, in my mind, any of the traditions, and I mean not all Christianity does it, but any tradition that does destroy the image, it's like it's the greatest, like that and resistance. Those are the two things that you don't, you know, you need the resist, you need the image, and you need to embrace change in order to do magic, you know.
The Greek gods and goddesses are so powerful, and the Christians couldn't hide it. They had to try to demonize Apollo. Apollyon is in the Bible. He comes up as the master, as the leader of the abyss. And then it talks
Kronos
about
is
Hades in
Satan, right?
Revelations too.
Kronos and Pan are Satan, right? Like they
Yeah,
conflate again, right? They take all this imagery and they conflate it into some super hyper twisted figure, you know? The mother goddess, right? Like who, right? Aphrodite and Saturn and Pan all get turned into Satan. It's
yeah, it's
ridiculous,
crazy.
you know?
I don't
Uh,
know where he became red at. Where did they throw the red in at? Like, where did they just throw in the red at? You know what I mean?
Well, Saturn, like especially in the Roman traditions, he's always described as kind of like this rusty kind of brown and this
Yeah,
reddy color, like red and black. But that's because, right, he's a god of the earth, right? It's agriculture and all this. But again, they take it to the nth degree, you know. And also, there's association with the mushrooms, you know, with a lot of
yeah.
that stuff. It's like you get the red because of you want to ingest the Amanita muscaria, right? So the Christians are using that same imagery, you know.
They could use it as Dionysus too, because one of the things that I have not ever seen a picture of Dionysus, which doing all this stuff and going through this, it makes me want to start writing poetry. It makes me want to start painting because I don't feel
Yeah,
like there's a good version of Dionysus because he's represented as the horned god, but you
dude,
never see
dude,
him with horns on his head ever. I
right?
haven't seen one.
You'll find it if you Google hard enough, but you need to create these images. Fundamentally, you need to create the image in your mind, right? So
Yeah,
doing art, like, this is one of the highest things you can do. That's a form of like bringing the deity into your life, right? Like, when they get, like, look at how the Indian tradition treats the creation of murtis and the creation of high fashion and high art. Like, we've lost this in our modern world, but there was a whole tradition of the aesthete, the appreciation of the artistic world, and the pursuit of creation as an act of enlightenment, you know. And they would get right into it. You're creating the image of God on earth, you know. Like, how
yes.
do you do that, right? To do that is like a grand undertaking. It's a powerful thing, you know. And like, Christianity has destroyed a lot of that. You know, I mean, you
Oh,
do
they
get
deem
some of it,
magic
like, or they've
evil.
exploited it, right? Like, you get some of these figures. Like, that's why Da Vinci is so interesting, because it's
They've
very
deemed
clear.
magic. They deem magic evil, but their Jesus was a magician. You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly. Jesus was. This is why it's so sad, you know. But again, Jesus is a sacrifice, right? He's like, he gets usurped,
was he
you
supposed to
know?
be a sacrifice though? This is one of the things that irks me so bad. When you understand it like we do, Jesus was caught in a garden at
Yeah,
4 a.m. with a
he
boy.
fails.
And then he gets arrested and then he gets crucified for it. And then they twist this little fucking thing around where they're like, oh, he's the sacrifice. But did he really know he was going to die? Or did
No,
he die because of that boy because he got caught? You know what I mean?
I think what happened is that the powers that be, right? They exploited the situation to their advantage, as they always
Oh,
do,
yeah.
you
To
know?
create another slave religion. To
Of
create
course,
another slave religion.
the ultimate slave religion, and to create a
Oh,
religion that could attack everything around it, right?
oh,
And
yeah.
destroy.
And through the ages, it's changed. Like, I feel like early Christianity, like,
Well, this
because,
is
like,
something we've seen get refined and refined and refined. And my, like, again, you know, I'm putting on my woo cap here, and but you know, I can talk with you because we have the same kind of beliefs. But what I see is, you know, it starts off with Christianity, but it gets more complicated. And this is where you get these things like in Islam, and then eventually it leads to these forms, like, you see almost like a religious atheism, where it's this
oh,
cold
yeah.
logic that's destroying everything, right? It reduces all connection. It reduces everything to this individual isolated form, right? Where no knowledge can persist. And it's like about removing all of the sacredness from the world, and turning it into something cold and calculated, right? And like, I don't know.
Oh yeah. I feel like the early Christianity, because of how Jesus was, it's kind of obvious he was kind of homosexual, right? So do you think the early Christians would have like not had a problem with that, or do you think as the ages went on that they deemed it bad? You know what I mean?
Well, this is a really complicated thing. I mean, even if Jesus is homosexual, I think he has clear issues with sex, you know? And like, it's such a complicated subject when you're going to get into homosexuality within the Greek and within the Jewish traditions, you know, because there's both persecution and acceptance in various times and in various ways, you know.
There was no homosexuality in the Greek. They didn't have a word for it. There was no
No, no, but
homosexuality.
what I mean by that is, like, you have homosexual people. I'm just using the language that we have in which to talk about this, right? Like, it's clear within Greek society that people were allowed to have these kinds of loving relationships and they were not stigmatized, right? And it was not a problem, you know. And you have these cults of homosexuality, you know, these militaristic like, it's a wide accepted practice. Not so within the Jewish tradition, you know. And the various other cultures within the Middle East as well. Not so, you know. So it gets complicated, right? And again, like, various people can exercise power and are allowed to do different things, you know. um it's such a complicated thing when you're dealing with the nature of taboo, and when these taboo come. What you do see with Jesus is, you see within some traditions a clear removal of any kind of homosexuality at all, right? So a character like John the Beloved becomes reduced. His connection to Jesus becomes reduced. You know, they talk a lot about John, but they don't focus on that aspect of, like, he's always there with Jesus, he's touching Jesus, he's special to Jesus, right? Like they downplay all that, and then they highlight and they keep in mind certain letters by people like Paul, which they take out of context, and they remove and they manipulate to perceive a certain thing. Like, there is a clear kind of, Paul takes issues with pedophilia, which is clearly happening within some elements of the church. And then you see the modern church use this to attack homosexuals,
When they
right?
breed it, like one of their rights, right? From what I've learned with Ammon is that they take a young boy, right? Especially if they have a pagan background, and they sodomize him. And if he screams out, then he rejects it. He rejects the devil. But not only that, but they taint this young boy's body, this beautiful young boy, to make it to where he is defiled, and he cannot have that pure connection to the gods and goddesses. He can't become an oracle, right? You remember learning about that?
Oh yeah. Well, you got to remember, right? Like, so much of Christianity is about engaging in this kind of calculated warfare against paganism, right? Like, Wretch was talking about this on the Discord. Like, you see all of this necromantic practice, you see all of this stuff that's being done. Like, if they can't destroy it, they're usurping it and twisting it and making their own. Everything they do is about denigrating the pagan traditions. It's about reducing the pagan traditions or usurping them. And that's what they can't remove. They transform, right?
Oh yeah.
But yeah, we should probably start winding down here. But it's wonderful having you here, Nick. Is there anything else you want to end with, or?
I'm just honored to be here, and that you gave me a chance to tell my story. And I love all of you very, very much. I found my new family in a way, and hail Satan and hail the gods and goddesses.
Hail Satan. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we've been drawing down the stars.